Hey guys, welcome back to World of Tanks. My name is Bruce and today I want to present the best credit making premium tanks in World of Tanks. So if you are looking for a tank which really lets you pick up credits, then this video is for you. Let's go. World of Tanks offers dozens of premium tanks, some of which are good and some of which are bad. In this video I will give you the current server statistic and tell you which premium tank you should purchase if you are looking not only for a good premium tank but also for a good credit maker. I will only take those tanks into consideration that achieved 10,000 battles during the last 30 days. But let me start with what all my assumptions are and how my calculation has been done. So let me start off with explaining why people could purchase a premium tank. In the past, before Wargaming introduced crew books, players pretty much needed a premium tank of each nation in order to quickly level up their crew. After crew books were entered into the game, this is not needed anymore. Nowadays you can simply spend gold for, let's say, 100% crew and then use those crew books to instantaneously boost your crew to an acceptable level, even for higher tiers. The second reason to purchase and play premium tanks is that those tanks are, at least very often, straight out better than their tech tree counterparts. Unfortunately, Wargaming has decided to introduce flat out better premium tanks so that players have an incentive to buy them. Examples are the Skoda T56, the oooBRUCEooo, the WoT 46 or even the BZ176. So some players will simply want to get the best performance out of every game and hence use those OP premium tanks. But there is another reason why you should have at least a couple of premium tanks in your garage, and this is to make credits. Premium tanks simply earn more credits in a game compared to their tech tree counterparts. And as I believe this is the most important aspect of a premium tank, I want to show you the best premium tanks in World of Tanks which let you make the most credits. So what does it mean when I say tanks that let you make credits? Well, such a premium tank would have three things. The first one is it is a tank which is performing great on average, meaning it is achieving an outstanding average WN8. So players simply get great results and perform great in such a tank. Second, it is a tank that has a great average damage output per game. This is important because in World of Tanks you earn credits with making damage, not with spotting or anything else. The more damage you make, the more credits you earn. This is why you should not purchase a light premium tank if you want to earn credits. And the second thing is your tank should have a low price ammo. If your premium tank is only able to fire super expensive ammunition, then your credit outcome will be significantly reduced. So the better your shell coefficient, i.e. the rate of alpha damage and shell price is, the more credits you will earn. So as you might already have discovered, my recommendation is not based on my subjective opinion. Instead, I will use the official World of Tanks server statistic to calculate the best premium tank of each tank class. So let me quickly show you how I made my calculation. If you're not interested in this stuff and simply want to see the result, feel free to go fast forward. The basis for my calculation is the World of Tanks server statistic from the last 30 days, which you can find on Tomato GG. So if you click on tanks by stats, then you find all the statistics of all the tanks in World of Tanks from the last 30 days. Here you can select all premium tanks like this and then, for example, go to tier 8. And then you have all the tier 8 premium tanks with all their respective statistics. You can see the WN8 as well as other statistics, like for example the average damage per game, as high tier premium tanks earn more credits compared to mid tier or low tier premium tanks. I only consider tier 8 and tier 9 tanks in my calculation. In addition to the performance of the premium tanks that I can get from Tomato GG, I am also interested in two of the statistics of each tank, which is the alpha damage and the shell cost, both of which I can get from Tanks GG. So on Tanks GG, I click on the full tank list and then select, for example, a medium tank, premium tank, and then let's for example go to the tier 8 CS52 list, and then this statistic or this page gives me the alpha damage, but then also the shell cost for the standard shell. So here's my calculation. So in the first column you can see the respective premium tank, then on the second column you can see the tank class, so heavy tank, medium tank, tank destroyer, or even light tank. And then here I have the WN8 of the respective premium tank. Once again, data from the official World of Tanks server statistic from Tomato GG. You can see the average damage of the respective premium tank. Once again, data from Tomato GG, so official World of Tanks data. And then here you can see data from Tanks GG, so the alpha damage of the respective tank plus the shell cost of the respective premium tank. And then I can calculate the cost per 1 damage. So for example, the 50 TP prototype has an alpha damage of 440 and a shell cost of 880, and this means that every single damage, so one amount of damage, costs 2 credits. So this is how I calculate the efficiency of the, or let's say the cost per 1 damage. And then I can calculate the damage coefficient, what I call damage coefficient. So first of all, I divide 1 by this number, simply because a lower number is better and a higher number is worse. And then I multiply this by the average damage of the respective tank. So for example, let's make a calculation for the 50 TP prototype. So for example, I calculate 1, or I divide 1 by 2, so giving me 0.05, and then I multiply this by the average damage, and so I get 615.5 for the 50 TP prototype. And then here you can see my actual equation. So I take 3 times the WN8, simply because I think that the WN8 is the most important aspect of a good premium tank per se, because you need a premium tank which is competitive and which is able to perform great on the battlefield. So this is what I want to see. And then I add the average damage, and then I add the damage coefficient. And as the average damage is incorporated into my calculation of the damage coefficient, I basically in this equation take twice the average damage. So 3 times the WN8 because it's the most important aspect, then twice the amount of damage, because keep in mind, earning credits has something, or is in order to make credits you need to make damage, and then I add the damage coefficient. It is important, however it is not as important as the average damage or as the WN8. And then I divide this basically by 5, and this is the result of each premium tank that I have listed up. So for example, as you can see, this tank here, the WoT and also the BZ176 perform great, simply because they have an outstanding WN8, plus they have an outstanding amount of average damage per game, and then the damage coefficient is, let's say, on the good side for those tanks. So for example, if you take the SHA MLE 75, a tier 9 light tank, it performs relatively nicely according to the European server statistics. The damage output is okay, but not that great. Plus the damage coefficient is super bad, simply because with one shell you can only make 200 damage, but it costs 880, and so the damage coefficient is relatively poor, giving this tank an overall, let's say, mediocre performance when it comes to being a good premium tank and earning credits. So what does it all mean? Well, those are all the top tier premium tanks, and now I can simply sort it by tank class, and then I get a distinct order of the best premium tanks according to the World of Tanks server statistic. So here is the result. The best premium heavy tank is the BZ176, and there's no question why this is number one of all heavy tanks. It has a WN8 of 1759 and an average damage of 1710. Plus, the damage coefficient is not the worst one with about 811. This tank features superb armor. I would go so far to say that it is quite OP. It has a superb alpha damage, plus it has the rocket booster mechanics, so you can even rush into position. So yeah, this is why this tank is so insanely strong. The second best heavy tank is the Skoda T56. This tank has a WN8 of 1660 and an average damage of 1698. Plus the damage coefficient is also not the worst one with 839. This tank features a 2-shot autoloader gun, superb armor on the turret if you are using your gun depression even on the upper hull, and yeah, you can deal 460 alpha damage, and this twice due to the clip size of 2 shells. Number 3 is the M54 Renegade. This tank has an WN8 of 1629, an average damage of 1516, and well, the shells are actually a bit expensive, but nonetheless this is a tank which can perform extraordinarily good. It has quite a strong turret armor apart from the weak cupola on top, which is quite huge. But if you can hide the cupola, then the armor really works. Plus you get a very mobile tank with a very precise gun and a good DPM. So I think this combination of the things just makes this a very strong heavy tank. Number 4 is the Chieftain Prototype, so a tier 9 heavy tank. This tank has a WN8 of 1553 and an average damage of 1653. The shells are a bit expensive, but this tank features a superb armor on the turret apart from its cupola and also on the upper hull. If you play hull down, look at this. So you get a hull down monster with this tank with 400 alpha damage, with a precise gun, and yeah, with quite a good mobility. So I think this is the reason why this tank performs so nicely on tier 9. Number 5 is the Bofors Tornwagen, and that was quite a surprise for me, but I think this tank is a ridgeline warrior like no other tank. It features an OP armor with no weak spot whatsoever, so you can really dominate your opponents on a ridgeline. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1605 and an average damage of 1411. The shells are not too cheap, but all in all I think it is the hull down capability that makes this tank quite easy to play, and thus a lot of players can really be successful in this tank. Number 6 on my list of the best premium tanks is the KV5, and yes, that was also a surprise for me. This tank has a great armor, however quite some weak spots, but you know what, if you ask me, if I encounter this tank, it feels as if I always underestimate the strength of this tank. So this tank has not the best WN8, 1351. The average damage is 1205, but the shell coefficient is extremely nice with 1338, and I think this tank is simply a decent credit maker because the shell costs are so tremendously low. Plus it has good stats overall. 2100 base DPM, 300 alpha damage. The gun is not the most precise one, but all in all, just a good combination. Plus, if I'm not mistaken, I think this tank has preferential matchmaking, so this might also be a reason why this tank performs so nicely. And yeah, so overall, I think this is a good premium tank if you want to make credits. Number 7 of the best premium heavy tanks is the 56 TP. Another surprise for me, but I think it's the combination of good armor, mobile tank and a precise gun. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1507 and an average damage of 1392. The shell coefficient, or the damage coefficient I should say, is not the best one. However, it is the performance that really makes this tank super strong. So yeah, the DPM is not the best one. However, 390 alpha is great. The shells are relatively cheap. This tank is super mobile, and I think you have to, or I have to say that due to the fact that this tank is relatively new, it's more the better players are playing this tank, and I think this is why the performance of this tank is so good as of now. But stats do not lie, so I think it offers a good combination of all the stats, maybe apart from the low DPM, and so it can really perform nicely, and it is a good credit maker. Number 8 on my list, once again to my surprise, is the Emil 1951, a hull down monster, at least on its tier, with a 3-shot autoloader gun. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1480 and an average damage of 1364. Its shells are not the most expensive ones, I would say. So 650 shell cost for 360 alpha damage. It has a 3-shot autoloader gun, and I think this tank is relatively easy to play because you simply have to go to ridgeline, and then you can dominate your opponents while playing hull down. And I think this combination makes this tank so strong, and yeah, hence it is a superb premium tank and number 8 on my list. Number 9 on my list of the best premium heavy tanks is the T77. This was once again to my surprise, but this tank achieves a WN8 of 1525 and an average damage of 1410. The shells are relatively expensive, but I think it's the combination of the firepower plus a very trollish armor, just like its brother on tier 10, the T57 heavy. So the strength of this tank is the insane firepower, so you can deal 1080 damage within only 4 seconds, and I think this is what makes this tank so strong on tier 8, and hence it is a decent premium tank. Number 10 on my list of the best premium tanks is the American tier 8 T832. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1508 and an average damage of 1498. The shells are relatively expensive because this tank simply, or I should say only, makes 320 alpha damage, but has to pay 1000 credits for every shot. Nonetheless, this tank is a superb ridgeline warrior, relatively easy to play, just like its brother, the T34. And so yeah, I think this combination makes this tank super strong, and it seems like players are able to outperform this tank. And yeah, it is number 10 on my list. Due to the fact that I have some tanks on my list which have either a bad standard pen like the KV5, or due to the fact that I assume stats being driven by experienced players playing this tank like the 56 TP, I will show you 3 more tanks. So number 11 on my list is the IS-3A Peregrine. Once again, I think that yeah, I would say more experienced players play this tank. The IS-3A, so the standard version of this tank, is also performing great on my list. However, it doesn't achieve a result which is as good as this one, so take it with a grain of salt. This tank has a 3-shot autoloader gun, and I think this is the strength of this tank. It achieves a WN8 of 1500 and an average damage of 1458. And I have to say the shells are relatively expensive. Nonetheless, this tank performs great, although in my opinion due to more experienced players playing this tank. So a tank which I can really recommend, and number 12 on my list, is the Object 7032. This tank is a behemoth of a heavy tank with superb frontal armor and a double barrel gun. Plus this tank is actually not the slowest on the battlefield. It achieves a WN8 of 1511 and an average damage of 1397. The shells are once again relatively expensive, 390 alpha, and shell cost is 1180, so the damage coefficient is only 481. Nonetheless, this tank is a true performer, and I can really recommend this tank. And finally, number 13 on my list is the Bisonte C45, a true ridgeline warrior with superb frontal armor if you play hull down on a ridgeline. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1470 and an average damage of 1396. Its shells are not the cheapest ones, not the most expensive ones. It has a 3-shot auto reloading gun with 360 alpha damage, and each shell costs 930. And yeah, in my opinion, this is a mobile tank which can really dominate opponents on a ridgeline playing hull down, and so it is a decent tank, and yeah, my number 13. Alright, let's jump to the best premium medium tanks, and number 1 on my list, to my surprise, is the T44-100. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1658, has an average damage value of 1274, plus a superb damage coefficient of 1263. And this is why this tank is number 1 on my list. So it is a decent credit maker. It has a good turret armor. It has a very precise snapshot gun. Superb. It has good DPM. It is relatively mobile, so no surprise actually why this tank is performing so well, so nicely. On the other hand, I have to say that this tank has a very low penetration value, simply because it is very, yeah, I would say relatively old in the game. Plus I think that it is more the better players who are playing this tank. Nonetheless, it has a great performance, and it is the number 1 on this list and a decent credit maker. The second best medium tank is the Batchat WoT, and yeah, I think you all expected this tank on this list. So this tank has a WN8 of 1751, an average damage of 1455. The damage coefficient is 671, so the shells are really costly, I should say. Plus, this tank only has 190 millimeters of penetration on the standard shell, just like the number 1 on my list, the T44-100. And this is why I will once again bring you not only the 10 best medium tanks, but the 13 best actually. Besides this tank simply outperforms other tanks. When it comes to mobility, it is a great spotter. It has a 2-shot autoloader gun, and despite this, a really good DPM, I should say, and the good players can really dominate the game in this tank. The third best premium tank is the Type 59. Once again, to my surprise, but this tank actually offers a good turret armor and a relatively precise gun, alongside with some decent mobility. All in all, it achieves a WN8 of 1534 and an average damage of 1196. Plus, it has one of the best damage coefficient in the game, because with this tank you can deal 250 alpha damage, and one shell only costs 252 credit. So a decent credit maker, and I think all in all, due to the performance and due to the cheap shells, this is a superb credit maker in World of Tanks. One thing I should mention is this tank only has a standard penetration of 185 millimeters, so you will have to depth the 2 key, and yeah, that is a drawback. I do not know if this tank actually has preferential matchmaking, but please write it down in the comment section and let me know and let the others know. But hey, this tank performs great on the battlefield, and so it is a recommendation. Fourth place goes to the WoT 46, and yes, I can really say that I adore this tank because it performs so nicely in World of Tanks. It achieves a WN8 of 1606 and an average damage of 1386. Plus the shells are relatively cheap. The damage coefficient is 773, so not the best one, but also not the worst one. This tank can simply dominate the opponents. It is relatively mobile, it doesn't have any armor, but it has a very precise gun, a 3-shot auto reloading gun with a very precise gun, good aim time, good DPM on top, and I think it's no question why this tank performs so nicely in the game. Number 5 is the GSOR 1010. So this tank actually performs nicely on the battlefield. It achieves a WN8 of 1641 and an average damage of 1438. The shells are relatively expensive, giving this tank a very bad, or a very poor I should say, damage coefficient of only 431. Nonetheless, this tank seems to work for most of the players. I think due to the precise gun, the exceptionally good aim time, and the 360 alpha damage. This tank doesn't have the best DPM, but I think the combination of a fast tank and an ultra precise gun simply works in World of Tanks. And if you make damage, and if you have a very precise gun, meaning that actually most of your shells actually hit and penetrate with your 280 millimeters of penetration, this actually works also if you want to make credits. Number 6 on my list is the Kampfpanzer 07RH. This tank simply has basically no deficiency. It doesn't have any armor, plus it only has 200 in alpha damage, but all the other stats are superb. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1603 and an average damage of 1227, plus the shells are mediocre. I would say maybe slightly above average when it comes to the price tag. As you can see, 2500 base DPM, insane. A very precise gun, a snapshot gun with 1.44 seconds, 65 kph top speed, and the shells are relatively cheap, 345. So all in all, a decent tank if you want to make credits. The 7th best tank is the AMBT. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1559 and an average damage of 1443. The shells are relatively expensive, but I think the combination of a good armor profile, yes, with some weak spots, but with the very strong firepower of a 3-shot auto reloading gun, makes this tank so strong, and this is why, yeah, it simply works even if you want to make credits. Number 8 on my list is the Astron Rex 105. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1568 and an average damage of 1450. The shells are relatively expensive. The damage coefficient is only 464. Now, what makes this tank so strong? The mobility is fine. It does have quite some turret armor, although it also has some easy to hit cupolas, but it has a 5-shot auto loader gun, and I think this insane firepower is what makes this tank so strong. Number 9 is the Polish CS52 Lis. This tier 8 tank achieves a WN8 of 1470 and an average damage of 1297. Plus, it has relatively cheap shells, so this combination makes it super strong, and it is one of the best credit makers in the game. It features good DPM, 320 alpha damage, a relatively precise gun. As I said, 340 alpha only costs 480 credits. The mobility is good, and I think this combination simply makes it a very strong tank if you want to make credits. Number 10 on my list of the best premium tanks actually is the Obsidian, and that was a surprise for me, but maybe it is because as of now the better players are playing this tank. Anyway, this tank achieves a WN8 of 1402 and an average damage of 1278. Now the strong part of this tank is the damage coefficient of 1002, so the shells are actually pretty cheap. So with for 200 damage, for 200 alpha damage, you only have to pay 255. Now keep in mind that this tank has actually some drawbacks, which is it is super slow. The armor is good if you can use your 6 degrees of gun depression. The gun is relatively precise, and I think this is the combination why this tank actually works. Maybe alongside with the pretty above average 2400 base DPM. All in all, this tank simply seems to work. It is super cost efficient, and yeah, this is why it achieves 10th place. Due to the fact that we had some tanks with really low penetration values on their standard shells, so like the WoT or the T44-100, I want to give you 3 additional tanks because a lower penetration value on the standard ammunition really defeats the purpose of a premium tank, which should be a credit maker. So number 11 on my list is the Lansen C, and this tank achieves a WN8 of 1493 and an average damage of 1260. It has an, I would say, an average to above average damage coefficient of 707. So I think, yes, this tank does not have any armor, but it has a good DPM, a relatively precise gun, 320 alpha damage, for which you only have to pay 570 credits. It is relatively mobile, and all in all a relatively good spotter. So it's not a star in one or the other regard, but I think the combination of the things really works for the player base, and this is why this tank achieves the 11th place. Number 12 is the 122TM, and this tank achieves a WN8 of 1515 and an average damage of 1370. The shells are relatively expensive and the damage coefficient is only 514, but I think what works for the player base, despite the horrendous DPM, is 400 alpha damage plus 233 millimeters of penetration plus a very precise gun. Yes, the tank is not the most mobile, but it does feature quite some armor, and yeah, so it seems to work, and it is a very good premium tank. And finally, number 13 on my list is the M4A1 Revalorisé. I am very curious what you think about this tank. According to my stats, it actually performs nicely with a WNH of 1394 and an average damage of 1182, plus the damage coefficient is 794, so slightly above average. This tank is relatively slow, does not have any armor, but the gun is what makes this tank work, at least from what I can see on the server statistic. 390 alpha damage, for which you only have to pay 580 credits, making this tank a superb credit maker. However, you have to say that this tank only features 200 millimeters of penetration. So yeah, simply tell me what you think of this tank. It is number 13 on my list. Alright, let's now jump to the best premium tanks when it comes to tank destroyers, and the best one is the Turtle Mark 1. This tank has recently been buffed by Wargaming and is now a behemoth of a tank. It achieves an astonishing WN8 of 1789, an average damage of 1581, and the damage coefficient is 734, so rather on the good side. This tank features superb armor, 3000 base DPM with 330 alpha damage, for which you have to pay only 710 credits, and yes, it is slow, but it packs superb armor, and I think this combination really works on tier 8. The second best premium tank destroyers, the Type 5 Kari. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1574 and an average damage of 1680. The damage coefficient is also not too bad with 724, so this tank is relatively mobile for such a heavily armored tank. Has 2300 base DPM, a very precise gun with 500 alpha damage, and for 500 alpha damage the shell cost of 1160 are actually not too bad, so all in all a pretty decent credit maker. Number 3 on my list is the German Jagdtiger prototype, so the tier 9 tank which was sent to tier 8. This tank has a WN8 of 1562 and an average damage of 1597. The damage coefficient is also not too bad with 731, so this combination of relatively good armor and a good 490 alpha gun seems to work on tier 8. 2300 base DPM, and for 490 alpha damage you only have to pay 1070 credits, so it seems that this works on tier 8. Number 4 is the Su-130 PM. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1418 and an average damage of 1433. It has a damage coefficient of 613, and I think the combination of a high alpha gun with good DPM, relatively precise, with good top speed, a good power to weight ratio, plus some spotting abilities really works on tier 8, even though this tank does not have any armor whatsoever. Number 4 on my list is the SHPTK. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1495 and an average damage of 1396. The shells are relatively expensive with a damage coefficient of only 392. It features a superb DPM, 250 alpha damage, and for this 250 alpha damage you have to pay 890 credits. The mobility is nice, it doesn't have any armor, however it is not as susceptible to HE as other tank destroyers, like for example the Su-130 PM, and overall it is a great performer on tier 8 and hence a great premium tank. Number 6 on my list is the TL7, the American tier 9 tank destroyer. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1353 and an average damage of 1575, and I think this is due to its autoloader potential. The damage coefficient is only 534, so what makes this tank so strong? In my opinion, it is the autoloader, which has 4 shots in its magazine, dealing 360 alpha damage. Yes, the shells are relatively expensive, but it seems that this combination works, at least on tier 9, and so you can really make damage in this tank and hence be a good credit maker. Number 7 on my list is the KJPZ T3 Jäger, the tier 9 German tank destroyer, and yes, this tank got criticized quite a lot once it came out and joined the live server, but my statistics actually tell me that this tank works as a premium tank. It achieves a WN8 of 1330, however it also achieves an average damage of 1551. The damage coefficient is 579, so average I would say, but once again the combination of an high alpha gun, maybe not for a tank destroyer, but 420 damage alongside with a good DPM and a very precise gun seems to work for the player base, making it a decent tank destroyer premium tank. Number 8 on my list is the ISU-152K. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1370 and an average damage of 1324. The damage coefficient is 601, so I would say average. It seems that players can make use of the 750 alpha damage alongside with the superb standard penetration of 286 and the overall pretty decent DPM of such a high alpha gun. The shells, once again, are not the cheapest ones. However, 1650 for 750 alpha damage is on the good side, I would say, or maybe average. You have to take this tank with a grain of salt, because I think it is a trollish tank, and yeah, you really have to penetrate your shots, hit and penetrate your shots in order to be successful in this tank. And this is, I would say, more a problem of high alpha guns compared to low alpha guns. Number 9 of the best premium tank destroyers in World of Tanks is the Rheinmetall Scorpion. Old but gold, I should say. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1337 and an average damage of 1345. The damage coefficient is 615, so on the average to slightly above average side, and I think the combination once again of a precise gun, high alpha damage, good DPM, good mobility works on tier 8, even though this tank cannot be used as a spotter, plus it doesn't have any armor whatsoever. But the combination of the things really makes this tank work, and hence it is a decent premium tank plus a decent credit maker. And finally, number 10 is the GSOR 1008. This tank has an even better WN8 compared to the Scorpion with 1392 and an average damage of 1393. However, the damage coefficient is only 371, so the shells on this tank are relatively expensive. You get an autoloader tank with 4 shots in the magazine with 320 alpha damage. However, one shell costs 1200 credits, so expensive shells. However, the performance of this tank really sets itself apart, and it seems that this tank really works. Once again, a combination of a precise gun and auto-loading firepower capability alongside with good mobility. And so yeah, number 10 on my list. Alright, let's now talk about the best light tanks in the premium segment in World of Tanks. Now, one thing I should mention is light tanks are usually not the best damage dealer, hence not the best credit makers. But if you are into playing light tanks, then this is my recommendation for you. So the best premium light tank in the game is the Panhard EBR-75. This tank features an astonishing WN8 of 1709. However, the average damage output is only 931. It has an above average damage coefficient of 708, making it an okay credit maker, at least when it comes to light tanks. I think the strong part of this tank is the insane speed. I mean, it is a wheeled French light tank, plus it has a 2-shot autoloader gun with only 180 millimeters of penetration, so take it with a grain of salt. You will have to dab the 2 key in order to reliably penetrate your opponents, but nonetheless, this tank performs great on tier 8 and is the best premium light tank you can get currently in the game. The second best light tank currently in the game is the Char MLE-75, so the French tier 9 light tank. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1494 and an average damage of 1096. However, the damage coefficient is really lackluster with only 249. So as you can see, for 200 damage you have to pay 880. Plus, you have a burst size of 3 shots, so you click once, you fire 3 shells. The gun is super unprecise, so you will most likely not deal 600 damage with 3 shots, making this tank even more expensive. Nonetheless, the performance is great on this tank, and hence it is number 2 on my list. The third best premium light tank in the game is the LT-432, so the Russian tier 8 light tank. This tank achieves a WN8 of 1354 and an average damage of 744. It has an, I would say, an average damage coefficient of 608. And I think the combination of quite some bouncy armor, plus good DPM, plus good speed, plus good spotting ability really makes this tank work on tier 8. Number 4 on my list of the best premium light tanks is the HWK-30, so the tier 8 German light tank. This tank features a WN8 of 1225 and an average damage of 723. The damage coefficient is only 444, so the shells are relatively expensive. For 240 alpha damage you have to pay 390. All in all, a pretty good light tank, and so number 4 on my list. And finally, number 5 on my list of the best premium light tanks is the Leichter Kampfpanzer M4190mm. This tank features an WN8 of 1066, an average damage of 658, and the damage coefficient of 564. So yeah, this tank is old, but I would say still gold, at least when it comes to making damage as a light tank. And so it is number 5 on that list. It is a bit outdated when it comes to camo value, so not the best spotter, but overall I think if you play this tank as a, let's say, medium light hybrid, this tank really works. Hence it is number 5 on my list. Okay, so those are the best premium tanks according to the official World of Tanks server statistic of the last 30 days, which you can find on Tomato.gg as well as on tanks.gg. Now, as I said, I listed some tanks like the T44-100, the WoT, and the KV-5, for example, which have a very weak standard penetration value. I also listed some tanks which I think are currently played more by the above average players and hence perform above average. This is why I presented 13 heavy tanks and 13 medium tanks instead of only 10. Now, I have to say, a model is only as good as the assumptions behind it. So I am really interested in your opinion and especially experience with the mentioned tanks. Please tell me whether those tanks are great credit makers or not. I'm very much looking forward to receiving your feedback. Alright guys, that was it for today with the video about the best premium tank in World of Tanks when it comes to making credits. I don't possess all those premium tanks, nor did I play them, so once again it is necessary for me to get your true feedback on whether you agree or not with the respective tanks. Hence, I really encourage you to leave a feedback down in the comment section below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Consider subscribing to my channel, and I see you next time in another World of Tanks video.